Hello gullible members of the model buying public, Sam's Trains here, how's it going? It's far from funny. Today I'm going to be revealing the top 5 worst model trains that I wasted my money on in 2022. To be fair to all of the manufacturers in today's video, I do think 2022 has been a really good year for new releases. I think the standards generally have been raised. And in fact, 4 out of the 5 locos I'm showing in this video are actually old and outdated models that the respective manufacturers have brought back without sufficiently updating them and yet still pricing them with a modern price tag. Now, of course, this is absolutely disgusting and I'm going to be shaming them for that today, but I do think it's better than bringing out new models that are utterly shoddy. Now, today's bottom 5 locomotives are bottom according to me, according to my ratings. There is a level of opinion involved in that you may not agree with. So if that is the case, please don't worry, that's absolutely fine. Feel free to comment below, in fact, if that's the case. Also, the point of today's video is to explain to you why I think these models suck. If you want a more balanced opinion on what these models are actually like, if you'd like to hear the good as well as just the bad, then I would direct you to their respective reviews, and I will pop links to those up there in the corner. But for now, in descending, ascending, I don't know, let's use descending, I find that word amusing, order, let's start with the top 5 worst model trains of 2022. Well, here's number 5 then, and this one is what I like to think of as a bit of a turd in sheep's clothing. It looks like quite a decent model from the outside, and it feels like one too. If you care to caress it with a light fingertip, you'll notice that it has a die-cast boiler, which is an extremely quality feature. But if we look more closely at the locomotive, we notice that things aren't quite as rosy as they seem. Quite a few parts of the model are just moulded and they're very messily painted, and in fact there is paint all over the place. You've got splodges of it on the boiler, which is less than impressive. And other separately fitted parts like the whistle look absolutely naff. They look like the limb of some sort of alien form that's been severed and stuck onto the steam locomotive. Not quite what Bachmann should have been going for, I don't think. Mechanically, there is this record-breaking bunch of 14 visible wires. You've got 8 black ones and 6 coloured ones, which appear to have been designed expressly to be as conspicuous as possible, and they look a real mess, complete with the gigantic white connector on the otherwise black chassis. There are no separate bearings or bushings on the driving wheels, and there's also no springing whatsoever underneath the front bogie. It just flops down onto the track using gravity, and as a result, you guessed it, the locomotive derailed constantly when I tested it. Performance-wise, the crawl was not fantastic, not an impressive crawl. Very low torque, especially given how heavy the loco was. Could have been a great hauler, in fact, but it wasn't. And to top things off, it's not very smooth running. It sort of gallops a little bit as it runs. So this is not what I would call a great model, but on the grand scheme of things, it's not what I'd call appalling either. There are quite a number of small issues, but no absolutely major ones, with the possible exception of that naff front bogie design. Now today, I am going to be issuing punishments to each of these shoddy locomotives, which are sort of in proportion to their crimes. So taking that into consideration, I think the punishment here will be reasonably mild. This locomotive is sentenced to appear in a video with inappropriate sound effects. And by inappropriate, I don't mean farting sounds, although if you're good, I'll give you one of those. I actually just mean inaccurate ones. Let's move swiftly on then with locomotive number 4, which is the Bachmann 64XX pannier tank, and quite frankly I've had bowel movements that constituted better value for money than this locomotive did. I ended up giving this locomotive a score of 6.08 out of 10, and here's why. By setting the RRP for this locomotive at £139.95, Bachmann suggests that this is a quality, modern and detailed locomotive, but getting it out of the box I found that, quite bafflingly, the opposite was true. Most locos of this size within this price bracket have plenty of metal or die-cast on them, but this locomotive is plastic through and through. The chassis is die-cast, but that's it. The running plate, the tanks, and all of the other bodywork is just plastic. The detailing is also unreasonably simplified given the price too. There are no sprung buffers whatsoever, no detail between the frames, it's just a flat surface, moulded plastic whistles which have just been painted, moulded effects on top of the tank where really you'd expect them to be separately fitted. The cab detail is quite simple, no painted gauges for instance, visible glazing parts on the back head, and the lamp brackets are just moulded to the bodywork and they're not separately fitted. In terms of the chassis, it's very bare bones, no special features here whatsoever. No speaker, no LED light effects, and just a 3-pole motor with no flywheel. During the review, I was even extra thorough by purchasing 2 of these locomotives, and under closer inspection, both of them had misadjusted pickups which were not correctly contacting with the wheels, and this led to a number of stoppages during the performance testing. Generally, the performance was adequate, if not outstanding, although the slow speed was not very good with either example. All in all, I think this could make a really decent beginner's model, but it's just too expensive given how simple it is. And so the punishment for this is going to be a reprimanding from Santa Claus.
Oh, so there they are, the 2 naughty little boys. No, Santa isn't cross. He's just disappointed. No, I don't always blame the children for being nasty, snotty, smelly little toe rags. I often look to the parents for the root cause. And Mother Bachmann certainly did not do a good job in your upbringing. Your upbringing cost a lot of money, but you did not receive a lot of love. Now, if you'd like Santa to euthanize you, I will be only too happy. But remember, once your wheels have been torn off and your motors crushed into dust, there's no going back. Have a Merry Christmas, you two, and be good.
Number 3 is a locomotive from one of my all-time favourite manufacturers, and I mean that quite sincerely, although that last sentence, I meant that quite insincerely. Anyway, the manufacturer is of course Helgen, and the locomotive is the Helgen Class 35, hiding under the brand name EFE rail. This model, however, was not able to hide from the signature Helgen shoddiness that plagues it. Now, to be absolutely fair, the build quality of this locomotive was fantastic, and I was very impressed. I did promise that this video would not include very much positivity, but I feel like this is something I really ought to mention. The reason for this, though, is partially due to how simple the locomotive is. This locomotive cost me an absurd £135.99 with an RRP of £159.95, and yet it features mostly moulded detail with very few separately fitted parts. The lamp brackets look terrible, they're just sort of painted green with a black stripe on the front of them. The grills are all moulded as well. The one grill that does look realistic has been ruined by the poor quality paint job. The moulded detail is also quite soft in several areas, which doesn't look particularly realistic, and you've got these low quality plastic buffers which are covered in flashing and of course not sprung. The cab detailing is also very, very basic, with nothing painted except for the red seats. Mechanically, this locomotive featured the typical Helgen setup with a genuinely unintuitive disassembly process which made servicing, maintenance and DCC fitting quite the headache. The bogie chassis is just plastic and there are no proper bearings on the axles. Body removal is a bit of a faff because there are no screws involved. You have to pry the body off the chassis, which is just a snap fit. There aren't even any proper lights inside. You've got these tungsten bulbs at either end, which are frankly so dim that you can't even notice them unless you dim the lights in the room and run the loco at full speed. Not exactly gonna happen, is it? Why is a locomotive being manufactured in the modern times with old tungsten bulbs? Why haven't they upgraded them to LEDs? Well, the answer is Helgen are upgrading these to LEDs. They're bringing out an updated version of their Class 35. but it's going to be even more expensive. So apparently paying £135.99, that's not enough to get you LEDs, folks. You've got to pay a little bit more if you want those 10p LEDs to be fitted. Come on now, be reasonable. In terms of performance, the crawl was quite naff. The 35 was completely unable to move itself at the slow speeds, although again, to be fair, everything else was not too bad. So in all, this is a very expensive locomotive, which has clearly been very cheaply made. In fact, in some places, such as those tungsten bulbs, it looks like they've gone out of their way to make this cheaply made, because I reckon those bulbs must cost more than LEDs do these days anyway. Anyway, very expensive yet cheaply made. That's one of the most irritating combinations in my opinion, and so my punishment is going to be to try and bugger up the mechanism by running this through a sea of small polystyrene balls. So I've got my balls on the floor with a mat underneath them so they don't make a huge mess everywhere, and here is the Class 35 ready to take its punishment. Right, well, I think it's time. Class 35, off you go please. Oh, good evening RM Web, I didn't see you come in there. Here's something for you to discuss for the next 9 weeks. Whoa. That didn't go very well. Perhaps needs a snowplow on it, there's an idea. Let's try again. I think perhaps momentum is the missing ingredient here, so let's see if we can improve this somewhat. Well, I don't know if we've buggered it up yet. Let's go one more time, I think, and then we'll let it off with a bit of Christmas forgiveness. Ah, it's almost going to get through, isn't it? Well, there we go anyway. A snow scene for all the modelers out there. The next locomotive, in place number 2, is barely worthy of that title. It is the Bachmann Gandhi Dancer, which should be an amusing novelty, but instead this was an irritating rip-off. The RRP is a genuinely shocking £62.25, which makes the price I paid of £26.63 look relatively cheap by comparison. However, I still think that's an awful lot of money for what you get here. Look at this. Straight out of the box, I noticed that the base keeper plate didn't fit correctly. The clip just doesn't engage with the chassis, and I've still not been able to fix that. It just does not fit. In terms of realism, let's just say that the 2 characters on board resemble something you'd see in a robotic nightmare in which 2 7-foot-tall men with arms and legs sticking oddly out the side of their bodies pump furiously to make their night terror cart reach the speed of sound. And to make things worse, it looks even less realistic than the old version of the Gandhi Dancer did, because the motor unit is actually even taller and less subtle than it was before. The performance was pretty good actually, but it still struggles to move itself at times, possibly though due to the fact that the base keeper plate keeps drooping down and getting caught on points and power tracks. It's not a lot to ask for to have this little thing work right, is it? But no, it didn't. And that's a fairly fundamental issue. The mechanism was extremely basic. There was no proper bearings or anything on the axles, a very basic motor without a flywheel, split chassis pickup system. Now obviously it's quite a lot to ask for a loco as small as this to be packed with a high quality mechanism, but when you think of the likes of the Wickham trolley, they managed it a lot better with that, and that thing was a lot smaller than this. So I think rather than just reusing an old design and charging a lot for it, they would have been much better off to just design it from scratch and make something decent. What a novel idea that would be, making something decent. Oh, I'm being evil today. To be fair though, it is a fun novelty, and if Bachmann had priced it as such, then I would certainly be treating it as such. Instead though, Bachmann decided to rip people off with it, and therefore I think a punishment is in order. And so, this Gandhi Dancer is about to appear in a disingenuous Christmas advert.
This is Jim. Oh, this Christmas could be his last, what with the threat of war and diseases. Let's make this Christmas one for Jim to remember, with a cheap gift. Why not try a Bachmann Gandhi Dancer? It'll look like an expensive gift when Jim checks your bank statement, but we promise that it's incredibly cheap, and we will help you to sell it on for more than you paid for it after Jim dies.
ruin your elderly friend or relative's Christmas with a disappointing Gundy dancer now, or next year you might regret it.
Because they might be dead. Well folks, we are almost at the end of this video, and the prize turd of this video is about to be revealed. It is another Bachmann excretion, and you might be able to smell it coming, because it is the 2MT. This monstrosity was new to Bachmann's range within the last couple of years, and yet it actually dates back decades. All Bachmann have done is taken their old model, slapped a new chassis onto it, and then tried to charge £164.95 RRP for it. As a result, the detailing on here is absolutely horrific. The moulding is really chunky and unrealistic. It features the world's fattest smokebox dart, which was also covered in glue. That was a nice touch, I enjoyed that. It's got these ridiculous looking handrails with the holders that are about 3 times the size they ought to be. No sprung buffers, no painted cab detail, and no realistic cab space because the floor is level with the windows. And as you can see, there was a lot of coarse moulded detail. So the bodywork was really old and terrible, an absolute travesty that this was priced as a modern and detailed release. Fortunately though, the chassis was much higher quality and it did run well, so that aspect of the model is free from my wrath. Having said that, that is nowhere near enough to make this locomotive worth the £140.95 that this costs at the retailers. There isn't even any die-cast on the bodywork, it's all plastic except for the chassis. And the livery is also incredibly cheap and simple to pull off, as it's just a plain black. There's also visible glue and flashing on several of the detail parts. It's just a big bonkers Bachmann bodge, isn't it? And for that, we are going to find a fitting punishment.
Taste of 2MTs is what I crave today.
Well folks, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Everything I've said about these models is absolutely true in my opinion, although of course I have been exaggerating slightly for comic effect. In all seriousness, I don't think the bottom 5 from 2022 is anywhere near as bad as the bottom 5 from last year or the year before. Yeah, we have definitely seen an improvement, and if you consider these are the very worst models that I looked at this year, we're not doing too badly, are we? So thank you very much for watching. If you've got any thoughts on these models, please do comment down below, and have a great seasonal time. Oh, that's a different ending. Have a good seasonal time, yes. I'll have a great seasonal time. I hope you have a good Are you having a good seasonal time? Ah, seasonal time. All right, folks, have a good seasonal time. I've said that too many times now. Cheery bye.